This is the secret history of the world economy, and this is especially for the American people, especially for the soldiers, men and women of America. 4,000 years ago, it's 2000 BC, and the biggest cities in the world are made of 5,000 people. They are located along the greatest rivers of the seven continents of the world: the Rhine River in Europe, the Danube River, the Volga River, the Euphrates River, the Nile River, the Congo River, the Indus River, and the Yellow River. 3,000 years ago, man learned how to smelt soft metals. They would find soft metals in the river basin, understanding if he uses heat, he could conform these materials to different shapes. This was essential for tool making, and they were beginning to use iron, which had to be made hotter in order to be formed into different shapes. It was stronger than bronze and copper, and it's harder to make things out of it because it had to be made hotter to conform it, mold it. This is the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, taking us to the Christian's year zero, 2,000 years ago. At that time, any water travel was done in small boats, carrying handfuls of people, and moved along rivers, because the ocean was too big and too vast and too dangerous for a small boat. It was at this time that Egypt developed a strong need for materials. There's a nearby kingdom named Phoenicia, modern day Lebanon. 2,000 years ago, the Egyptians have made already 3 expeditions across the shore to Lebanon, Phoenicia, to establish a trading port to be able to ship cedar timber back to Egypt in large amounts. That cedar timber was essential for building one thing in particular: big ships, only big ships. This material is explicitly for the technology of building ships, fulfilling the Egyptians' long desire to reach the southern end of the Red Sea. They took all of the cedar and brought it back to the Grand Nile Delta, where ships would be so valued, highly valued here more than anywhere. They built a canal that would allow the Nile to connect to the Red Sea, and that was the first time they were able to get any water travel from the Mediterranean Sea through the Nile, across the canal into the Red Sea. For the first time, they had that any shore of the Mediterranean Sea had ever traveled by water into the southern seas towards Arabia. On the water 2,000 years ago, any kind of trade from the east across the world to the west was moving up the Yellow River onto the Tibetan Plateau, across thousands of kilometers of desolate highlands, barren land, inhospitable to human life, an incredible journey. And the reason why someone would do this journey is that the largest cities in the world are upon the largest rivers in the world. The largest rivers in the world are in China. They are formed due to mountain ranges, geological processes, which generate water. Rivers that were so bountiful, they could share this bounty, they could spread this bounty to all of the world because they had the most things, a great fertility, and they were sending it. And anyone who wanted these things, which they did not have before, came here and saw that things were strongly accumulated here on the big rivers. The working together of the city made them economically powerful with bountiful material. They would travel with caravans across the land, across the Tibetan Plateau, across Iran, across Iraq, crossing barren wastelands and deserts, over to the area at Palestine near the Tiberias Lake, where there were established kingdoms. And it's the only way to take the land bridge across the Bosphorus Strait and traveling by land to Europe from the Far East. The final destination, which controlled trade 2,000 years ago, is Italy. It is the time in history of mankind 2,000 years ago known as iniquity. The Iron Age ended, and this transforms into the Middle Age 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago is the Middle Age of man, and 500 years ago begins the modern era. It continues until 100 years ago. During this time, there's incredible transformation of humanity, and it takes its roots in technology. So it's 600 years ago, and we are now going to transform from the Middle Age into a modern era. It is the year 1401, and the first ships to have ever traveled an oceanic distance is going to depart from the port at Europe. It's going to sail down the shore of Africa, the west shore of Africa, down the coast, and it would be 88 years later that the first vessels are going to be able to move from Europe to India. So this is Europe. There are strong, productive economies developing in India, and the Europeans understand this to be life and death, the end of life as they know it, the end of their existence. So in a savage, desperate journey, they're going to travel from the shore of Europe across the Atlantic Ocean to the coast of Brazil in South America, following the ocean tide in a sailboat weeks after weeks of human trial at sea, which cost so many men their life, and never ceased to devour the lives of sailors for every voyage made. Then to resupply and relaunch that ship, because they are sailing across the South Atlantic, following the trade winds to the western shore of Africa, around the southmost tip, passing the Cape of Good Hope. They're going to use the sailboat in 1488, 500 years ago, and cross this distance in 3 months. Following the trade wind, they are going to depart from South America to the tip of Africa and spend another 3 months just sailing at less than 10 knots across this ocean. They're going to round the tip of Africa, staying along the shore to the east shores of Africa, out onto the Horn of Africa. They're going to wait on the Horn of Africa for the wind to blow once again, the seasonal winds, and when the wind is right, they're going to come across the Arabian Peninsula south to the land of Surat in India, at the Panhandle in West India. They're going to come to load up their ships with goods and to establish a trade relationship which will allow, for the next 100 years, 5,000 ships, ship after ship after ship, with loads after loads after loads, and it would be entirely like Santa Claus. And this is the merriest Christmas. Loads upon loads of things that you had never had, that no one had ever had, that no one could ever get. Porcelain, silver, coffee, salt, metal, cotton, indigo, pepper, riches upon riches, and boatloads upon boatloads. And they were carrying them from India to Europe, transformational, like heaven, like paradise, the bounty of heaven coming down on Europe, things that they had never had. It's 500 years ago, and any man who returned from India who would invest 100 pounds into the trade would be returned 1,000% of his profit when he returned with his ship. The kings and rulers of Europe understand that those ships are going to rule Europe, and the power of the goods and the trade of those men who control those ships are going to take control over and usurp all power of Europe. It's 1600, and they established the East India Company in a voyage. They returned 2 years later after bombarding and raiding all down the ports, every port from city to city down the west shore of India, razed to the ground. They bombed using the ship's cannons and forced into submission every leader of every port from north to south until they reached Calcutta. Calcutta was one of the biggest and oldest trading city ports in India because it's a large city. The rulers gave the India Company hell. They gave them a run for their money. They killed a lot of them and forced a temporary retreat. But because the Europeans were so determined, and they had come in force with reinforcement ships and cannons, a number of ships, they were able to overwhelm Calcutta and all the major powers of India, and they established the trade connection by force. So it's the year 1600, and the East India Company are making thousands of voyages to India, building thousands of ships for cargo. They are bringing back all of these goods to Europe, and the importance to the power structure is immediately recognized by the European kings. It's like unlimited power. They stand in awesomeness of it. Within 30 years that the Europeans arrive to India, there's famine in India, where tens of thousands of people are starving to death because there's no food. Incidentally, in this time, this 100 years, there is a massive trade belt of the East India Company, and the people of India are dying by the tens of millions, while Europe is getting hog high. There's a series of events in this time. As soon as the East India Company is rising, and there is no empire that could ever be as big as the Mongolian Empire until there was the British Empire, 300 years ago. It goes under the name East India Company. An incredible world battle between the East and the West is going to break out after this. The British Empire is going to rise, and the Mongol Empire is going to subside. So we are leading up to 1700. It's 300 years ago. There's going to be a big exportation chain set up. To move things out of India to Europe. Within 30 years, they will have killed 20 million people to make Europeans live a life they never dreamed. In 1770, there's going to be a massive famine in Bengal at the delta of the river Ganges downstream from Delhi. The famine is going to kill 20 million people. They killed half of that population by famine while they were exporting all of the goods. So they made up a fake story to try to change the European power structure. The Europeans were in full comprehension about this, that the power of the trade was enough to control a kingdom and to overthrow a king, and that trade made the overthrow of kings very easy. So by 1774, the East India Company was going to come into partnership with the government, and the government was going to get a 50% say in whatever the East India Company does. So essentially, the East India Company becomes an arm of the government that would allow, instead of only the men who are trading on the ships, the former lords and princes of Europe who control the East India Company, these powerful merchants, it would create a power sharing where they could not be the sole investor, and it could not be to his discretion anymore, because the government needed to generate a legitimacy over the society of the land. 10 years later, there are successions of genocides, tens of millions at a time, and continues for 100 years, until this is the great face of the East India Company. It is 1800 now, and there are the genocides. 1783, genocide killing tens of millions. 1791, genocide killing tens of millions. 40 years later, 1837, genocides kill millions at a time. And the Punjab, who are living on the Indus River, get the idea that this is getting very crazy. We have to do something. We have to go to India. So they come to Delhi and they kill every man in the city in effort to destroy any economic treaty there and destroy the East India Company. That's what they wanted to do. The Punjab came to India to destroy the East India Company in Delhi. However, the genocides continue. The massive trade of the East India Company during 1800 was at its prime. They're exporting like madmen out of India. 1860, genocides kill tens of millions of human life in India. 1868, genocides kill 10 million. 1876, genocide. 1896, genocide. And 1900 even, genocides in India. 10 million dying of starvation. So it's the year 1800, and all of those ships coming from East India Company, starting this great world commerce, are using sails. They are sailing on sailboats, and they're sailing ships at the fastest that they would ever go, as if they were using their oars to row the boat, and they're going to row their boat half a world away. They're going to take 9 months to get these ships back to Europe, 9 months shipping. So your shipping and handling charge, it's a 9-month journey to Europe. In 1800, there's a great transformation in the world economy. It involves technology named the steam engine, and for the first time, they were going to be able to go faster on this voyage. This travel will become intensely faster. They would be able to get a lot more things in one go because they could use a bigger ship using this power. It was the power of the steam engine, and the moment they were understanding that this could propel objects with steam, they understand, okay, what's stronger than steam power? And they went straight for that combustion engine. They said, put gasoline in it and see if that'll make her fly. And she did. She flew up into the sky. And this transformation is going to occur in this time 200 years ago. We're going to be lifted out of the dust, out of the high, dangerous waves of a massive ocean. We're going to be lifted out, and we're going to live a life that they never could dream of. It's 100 years ago of our history. So it's 1800, and the East India Company is thinking of a plan in Europe. The plan is they're going to use joint stock companies. They'll call them corporations. And what we will do is anyone who has money can have a share of this business. And what we're going to do is put your money towards this share. And then when we make the trade and we make a profit and we make some money, your share is going to be increased due to the profits profiting. So joint stock companies raised Europe out of the dust when they were moving wagons with carts, and now suddenly they needed roadways. Not only that, they were going to need cars. They were going to need commercial blocks in the city. They would need infrastructure of large buildings, and you would want them connected with ports so that it's shipping accessible. Then we would need to have carrying firms so that when everything arrives, we can carry it out along the roadway. And the first 10-story building was built in Europe, made out of a cast iron frame by the stockholders of the East India Company due to their riches. They built the first commercial blocks, and they built bridges, and after 40 years, they realized cast iron could not compare to a new technology named steel. And with steel, they were going to go higher and stronger than they had ever gone. Skyscrapers at Shenzhen speed, a whole city filled with skyscrapers, transforming a skyline into 100 stories buildings. So it's turning on to the year 1900, and there's going to be the rise of the combustion engine, and there's going to be a succession of wars named world wars that go on for 100 years under different names like Korea and Vietnam. And it will change everything that we've ever known, and it will create a surge of power.